I work right around the corner, and this is where, I run and grab the paper, grab my coffee and breakfast sandwich right over there. Morning, grabbing a paper.
Melissa Baer's morning routine includes buying her local newspaper, the Berkshire Eagle, at Palmer's Variety Store, just down the street from her house, where she can check in with neighbors she sees there.
Thank you, you too.
It's just another way a newspaper brings her community together. But as we've been learning in this series on what's happening to local news around the country, more and more communities are losing their newspapers and the reporters who go to city council sessions and school board meetings and take pictures at the high school sports events. The Pew Research Center reports that the number of newsroom employees at newspapers dropped by 47% between 2008 and 2018. And that's our data point for this episode of After the Fact.
The basic problem for local news in the making for a number of years, and unfortunately it's gotten that much worse the last few, is that print advertising is gradually shrinking greatly, and after a while, print circulation has started falling too. While there's digital news income, both from advertising and now from subscriptions, doesn't really make up the difference.
That's Rick Edmonds, who analyzes the media business for the Poynter Institute, a journalism think tank in St. Petersburg, Florida. In this series, we've been telling you about the more than 2,000 newspapers that have closed in this country over the past 15 years. But the financial cutbacks that Rick talks about are having a big impact on the papers that remain, too.
And the numbers of papers that are shrinking are a lot greater than the ones that have actually gone out of business. And many of the ones that have gone out of business are very small. You may be in a metropolitan area looking at a paper that has 50 people producing it where there used to be 200, and it's skinnier, but I'm not sure everybody's going to notice that.
Well, people were noticing it in western Massachusetts. The Berkshire Eagle, the daily paper that in one form or another has covered that bucolic bit of New England almost since the founding of this nation, had been purchased by corporate owners 25 years ago. In recent years, it faced budget cut after budget cut. There were fewer reporters and less news was covered. Then, in 2016, a group of local investors took over the Eagle. They're expanding coverage and hiring new reporters. It's all so counter to the national trends that we had to go up there and talk to people about it and what a good local paper means to them.
So my office is right through here. Morning, Walt.
That's Melissa Baer again. You heard her at the beginning of this episode buying her local paper. She has lived in the Berkshires for 8 years.
Welcome to BCAC.
She relies on the Berkshire Eagle to get the word out, to drive donations and dollars, so her organization can serve the poorest in that region.
I help low-income individuals in our community, specifically children around wintertime, with our warm clothing program, which we serve over 2,000 children every year.
So you care a lot about the fabric of your community, the civic life here.
Yes, I do. Our community matters, and I'm blessed because what we do every day is help people who are vulnerable or in need. It really doesn't feel like work. It's the good work.
What's the role of your newspaper in everything you've just described, the work you do and the civic life here in the Berkshires?
The warm clothing program has been in the Berkshires for 38 years. The newspaper, Berkshire Eagle, has always supported the program. When that article hits the paper, we see a huge increase in donations, cash donations, new coat donations, new boot donations. I have people calling me on the phone saying, what can I do to help? How can I help? Are you still looking for sponsors? It just goes to show you how important the local paper reaching people who might not have access to their phones and social media. So yeah, it is really important to this program.
If the paper wasn't here, what would it mean for your work?
I think we would be missing out on a huge demographic of the community. I think a lot of our older community relies on the newspaper to get the information that they need. It's important to have these local newspapers, the Berkshire Eagle, to get in the hands of the people that might not have access to news or what's going on in their community.
The paper's gone through some changes here, and local ownership has returned in the last few years. Have you noticed a difference?
I have, actually. I can see a lot more community interest stories because I think the paper has been more local. You see what other people are doing positively in the Berkshires.
Beyond your work, what does the Eagle mean for you just as a resident of this community?
I was thinking about the local newspapers, and I went back to Pennsylvania, my hometown. One of the first things I did was go to a coffee shop and read the local paper. So it's like picking up a little slice of what's happening in this little spot. And that's the beauty of the paper. It's about digging deeper and getting to the real stories of and the pulse of things. And I feel like sometimes that's lost on the internet.
So we're sitting in Dottie's, and both of you suggested this would be a good place for a conversation.
It's a hangout.
Yeah, there you go. And it's a hangout. Okay. I'm looking around, and this feels like a community with a lot of life to it. If I could, tell us who you are.
I'm Carol Siegel. I came here right after college to marry Pittsfield native. I've lived here ever since. I worked in the Pittsfield schools for 38 years, and I don't think you have a community without a newspaper.
So my name's Pete Marchetti, born and raised in Pittsfield. This January I started my 13th year on the city council. When I'm completed, it'll be 7 terms. I am pretty much a community advocate in a whole host of ways.
Tell me a little bit more about Pittsfield as a place to live and sort of community involvement in general.
It's a great place if you want to be part of a community, because I can't tell you how many parts of the community I'm involved in just as one citizen. You know, across the spectrum, there's a tremendous opening for people to be involved.
Well, let me ask you then about the role of your local newspaper and news in general, because that's how a community knows what's going on. What's been the flow of news in your community in your time on the city council?
I mean, ironically, when you ask a political figure what their opinion is of the news media, you know, the answer is it depends on the day of the week and it depends on the issue. And, you know, as any person, you agree or disagree with their editorial, or you agree or disagree with the quote-unquote slant to an article. But, you know, for my involvement with the newspaper on a couple fronts, you know, one on the political front, they're putting out the information so that the general public knows what we're doing. They're, you know, reporting the stories as accurately as they can. You know, they're local reporters, so they know the players. It's not like we're dealing with, you know, people that have been imported to report our local news. They're local players, local owners. I have chaired the Pittsfield 4th of July Parade for the last 20 years, and last year we had the conversation that due to fundraising it could be the last one. I still remember going in and having a meeting with Judge Rutherford and saying, you know, we're in trouble and what can you do to help? And, you know, his enthusiastic approach of this is an event that Pittsfield can't afford to lose. I'm all in to do whatever I need to do. And the Eagle took a very major role in kind of saying to the community, if this is an event you want, you have to help us save it. And they kept the news on the forefront every day. They helped promote fundraising events that we were having.
So Carol, you've been reading the local newspaper here for as long as you've lived here. That's a while.
Close to 60 years.
Yeah. So you've seen that paper evolve over the years. How has it changed? How has it served the community in the time you've lived here?
Well, first of all, it changed greatly. When I first came here, I remember I was particularly interested in journalism. The Berkshire Eagle had an amazing reputation. I don't know what year, I wish I could tell you, but sometime in that period, and I did cut it out, but Time magazine had an article about the great newspapers of the world, and so there it was with Le Monde, Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Berkshire Eagle. We were all out of our minds. Are you old enough, Peter, to remember that? And I just trusted it. I read it, of course, every day, which I still do. I'm just sad that it's much smaller than it was in those days. That's our times.
If the paper was to go away,
oh God,
what would you miss the most?
I love the editorial page and the letters to the editor, because it keeps you in tune with what community is thinking. You know, sometimes I'll read a letter to the editor and go, whoa, what are they thinking? And sometimes I'll read a letter and say, yeah, they're right on. Sometimes I read the editorial and go, ooh, that was a little harsh. But again, it's, you know, one person or a couple people's perspective. And, you know, it's a good place to start a conversation.
What would you miss the most, Carol?
I miss knowing about the community. who's doing what organizations are doing something, I love going to events, but I would also miss the point of view. If I'm very rushed on a day and don't have time to read the whole paper in the morning, first thing I do is open to the editorial page to read the editorials, the letters to the editor, and the op-eds. I would feel an incredible loss without the Eagle. Incredible. And I worry about it. I do. Obviously, all of our new papers are under siege right now. On the other hand, I think people also know in the country how crucial our First Amendment is, But just the local paper concept, I would miss it. I mean, it's a very absolute part of my life that matters to me.
This is the sports department because you can tell by the mess. This is our awesome features department. These are our wonderfully awesome page designers.
So how many reporters you have now?
We're staffed up for like 12, but we're searching for some right now. We have 3.
That's Kevin Moran, executive editor of the Berkshire Eagle. He's showing us around the newsroom where he's hiring more reporters to give more local news to readers in the paper's coverage area, which stretches from the Vermont border in the north down to Connecticut. The new spending is possible thanks to local investors taking over the paper. One of them, a retired judge, Fred Rutberg, is now the publisher. If I could, Fred, start with you, and I know you've lived here most of your adult life. Talk to us a little bit about what it was that gave you the idea to buy this newspaper, return it to local ownership, and do what you're doing here.
Well, first of all, I'm not doing it alone. And what I did with 3 partners, Stan Lipsy, Bob Wilmers, and Hans Morris. Unfortunately, Bob and Stan have passed. But the story, I've told it 1,000 times, and it's true. I was in Nantucket on summer of 2014. I went to a lecture with my wife. Joe Klein spoke, raising money for the Athenaeum out there. And in the middle of his speech, he said, democracy requires citizenship, and citizenship requires a town square. And I looked over at my wife and I whispered, the Berkshire Eagle. And it was the town square. I used to say it was required reading. People would start their sentences in the middle, assuming you'd read the paper in the morning. And it had let go of that under corporate ownership.
This has been a storied newspaper. I mean, for people who may not follow journalism, this was always been considered one of the best local papers in the country. What was it like when it sort of slid for that short period? And what happened to the community as a result of that?
When resources go, and by resources I mean reporters and editors, when they leave the newsroom and when the size of the newsroom is reduced, you simply cannot cover the community like you had been able to. Journalism is a labor and time-intensive business, and it requires, fortitude. It requires persistence. It requires people to have to spend time covering the communities to develop institutional knowledge about the people, places, and things that make the community great. And we started to lose that under corporate ownership, and it deteriorates from there, and readers notice that.
I was on the bench for 21 years, and I said I had a front row seat. I saw what deindustrialization did to the fabric of this community, culturally, socially. But the idea was, if we could shine a light on the good things that are happening in this community, that we could then have a better case to attract smaller companies to come back to the Berkshires and reestablish our industrial base, which is what the history of this community comes from. To that extent, the newspaper had a real a part to play in that role, in that situation.
So talk about staffing up. What were you looking to do that you weren't doing before specifically? Like numbers of reporters, what they were going after. What's your marching order as the boss in the newsroom?
We added some very fine journalists, and we've expanded sections. I mean, we've expanded our features department. We used to run, a little 6-page features section that probably was 80% wire on Sundays. Now we run a 12-page features section on Sundays, and it's all local. We've expanded the sports section. We've expanded our business section and coverage, and obviously local news.
What's been the reaction of the community to 12 pages of features instead of 6 that are locally produced and all of the other great investigative reporting you're doing?
I walk down the street and strangers come up and say thank you. That's why I'm the luckiest man walking. I mean, this doesn't happen to too many people in the world. People say, "Oh, you're Fred Rutberg." I say, "Yeah, just want to say thank you."
That's amazing.
And it's true.
And it also goes against the trend because, a lot of the loss of local news, the analysts who look at this business are attributing it to people being distracted, not paying attention to their own community life as maybe they once did. They didn't put a monetary value on the news, so they knew they had to pay for it. You're doing it, and people seem to be happy with what you're offering them.
We're developing what I like to call an emotional connection with our readers. I think it's extremely important to build that emotional connection, whether it's providing the news and information that they need or entertaining them, providing, thought-provoking commentary, having a thriving letters to the editor section and commentary section, which we do in spades. That's a real conversation changer. And it's nice, as Fred said, to be able to walk down the street and have our journalists be revered, and I don't want to sort of overstate the fact, but there's a certain amount of heroism that they are receiving or being attributed, and that's pretty powerful because it wasn't going like that before. I was a little daunted walking down the street sometimes because people would get after us because of the lack of quality left to the newspaper. That's no longer the case.
You've been at it now 4 years. As I understand it, your circulation is holding steady in the print side, right?
It's fairly flat, and I like to say that in the newspaper industry today, flat's the new black. The good news is that our digital-only circulation is increasing, and that's on an upward trajectory. So everyone knows that's where the future is, so hopefully that's where our future is.
You were talking a moment ago about trust and what it means in the community. You've been at it, as I said, for 4 years. If you want to keep this going, what's next?
We believe that the community's trust in us is our number one asset. That's the thing that is our most valuable asset. And we do everything we can to respect that and to increase it. So I go out into the community and at every chance I have to talk to people, to talk the gospel of the newspaper, to explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing things, to hear from them what they want and hear their complaints. I answer my own phone. I get emails every day from people whose paper was delivered in the bushes or didn't get the way they wanted, or it was wet this morning. We deal with all those things personally.
One of the things that we hear frequently from people is they thank us for giving them their newspaper back.
Even some of the reporters come in and say, "Thank you for giving us our newspaper back."
I know what you mean.
And personally, last May was 3 years, and they asked me to come into the newsroom, and our news staff put together a video, just thank you, from the staff. I can't watch that video without getting tearful. I mean, put that in my casket with me.
Yeah. Well, let the record show that the hard-boiled editor's got tears in his eyes. Gentlemen, thank you very much. For a podcast that is all about data, it's worth repeating some from this series. Nearly 2,100 newspapers have closed in this country since 2004. Over the decade that ended in 2018, the total number of newspaper newsroom jobs have dropped by nearly half. And in that year alone, a quarter of newspapers with a circulation of 50,000 or more had layoffs. If you'd like to learn more about the loss of local news, there are more resources on our website, pewtrust.org/afterthefact. And if you'd like to learn more about what's happening in your community, pick up your local newspaper, if you're lucky enough to have one. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc.
After the Fact is produced by the Pew Charitable Trusts.